people living in the lane, and the lane had 6 or 8 little houses on this side, 6 or 8 houses on this side, and none of the houses had a toilet. The toilets were at the end of the lane. There was 2 little toilets, 2 little boxes, black boxes. And the whole street, 6 on this side, 12 houses had to use, one was for the ladies and one was for the gents. And the water for that lane, Griffin's Lane, was out on a tap in front, not a tap, but what they call a pump. What we used to call a cast iron pump, a thing called a knockaderry. It used to have a lion's head on it, and there was a handle on the side, and when you turned the handle, the lion's head would spout water. It was called a knockaderry because all the water comes from a place out in Kilmeaden called Knockaderry. If you ever do, you should get your mum and dad to bring you out and show you the lake where the water comes from. But can you just imagine the lane with no toilets and no water, and everybody had to go to use public toilets. It was in an awful state. So these were all being demolished as we were growing up. When we went down to Mount Sion Avenue, it was a big street. I'd forgotten to say about Sexton Street. Amusing. One thing that struck me in Sexton Street was that there was a very famous woman, street entertainer. There was a woman called Hannah Mooney. Older people will remember. And Hannah Mooney used to come up to the street every so often, and she'd stand on the middle of the street, and she'd start singing, "There was a wild colonial by Jack Duggan." And she'd walk the whole length of the street singing, and then she'd walk the whole way back again. And then she'd knock on the door to collect her, because she had entertained, you see. So this was street entertainment. But down in Mount Sion Avenue, we, like everybody, we played on the street. Again, cars were very few and far between, so people played hurling, people played football. Actually, people played cricket, amazingly enough, on the street. I don't know why. People played cricket. The girls all did skipping with the big rope. I don't know if anybody skips anymore with the big rope. And the small rope. But does anybody swing on the pole? Because we had, up in our street, the lights were on timber poles, and the girls were able to make a kind of a lasso, and they'd do this with it. And the lasso would rise up the pole, and they'd have a swing, so they'd make another loop on, and they could swing around the pole, really in a massive big, and could fasten around, and then they'd come back around again. It was really exciting, but it had some knack. I think it must have come from, almost from like ships or shipping, that people were used to ropes, and they could, everybody would go down to George White's, which is only around the corner, and buy 20 feet of rope, and you'd make this thing and go up the pole. We also played, you know, marbles? Yeah. Well, nobody, in Waterford in the 50s, nobody called them marbles, they called them, what's they called them? Chinese, yes. And they used to play that, we used to play Chinese. But I don't know if the game has gone now. We used to make 3 little holes in the street. One hole, then we do 3 little like this, then we make another hole, then we have another 3. And we had 3 holes. And so you'd stand back here and you'd try to push the Chinese up into the first hole. If you got it in, then you could progress on. And all the holes had names like first for nothing, middle for nothing, top for nothing, middle for card, whatever the hell, middle for card, middle for set, top for set. And you could knock your opponent's Chinese off, and if it was not within the span of 3, you're knock on 3. It was a really esoteric game. But the other game that we also played, or that the girls especially played, but we used to play too, we would admit it, we used to play nooks. Does anybody know what nooks is?
Oh, no. Yeah.
What's nooks?
I think it's where you bang.
No.
Nooks are, you got conkers and you smack them together.
No, that's conkers. Come on.
Is that the thing where you have all the little like stars?
Yes, there was you can play this with 5 stones. 5 little stones, and they're called nooks. Somebody says that it goes back to, it's a very ancient game. It comes from Roman times, and used to play with knuckle bones of animals or something like that. And what you do is you have 5 of these things, and you throw them and catch them on your hand, and then 5 stony, 4 stony, 3 stony, 2 stony, finger andrews, cracks, no cracks, and if you picked up one, you'd have one in your hand and to crack of it. That was cracked. Then you have to pick up one when you had one in your hand, and if it couldn't crack, there'd be no cracks. Then you have to throw one up and no cracks in lady egg. It's really complicated. But all the women, my sister and my mother, they were all the women. Girls were expert at this game. You could never beat the women at nooks. So some of the teachers should get nooks and show you how to play nooks. Because it's really, really entertaining. And the other thing, I could never get a hand up. The girls would have 2 or 3 balls and it'd be against the wall. And I don't know what, I could manage one. It must have been awkward. And they'd be able to do whatever they were doing with the 3 balls against the wall. I don't remember anyway. But we played football on the street, and at that time the guards, most of the guards cycled, and of course if you were caught playing football on the street you'd be arrested, you'd have to go to court, you'd be fined for playing football on the street. Really serious time, you can imagine. As I said, most of the time in the 50s there was or the very late 50s there was no TV. So what did we do when we had no TV?
Read books.
Yeah, and then?
Charades.
No.
Cinema.
Go to the cinema. That was the huge thing for us. We went to the cinema. Almost every Friday and Saturday, it was almost universal. You went to the cinema. Now there were 3 cinemas we went to. There was the Coliseum, the Regal and the Savoy. And you could go to the Coliseum for 4D. Now this is about 1 cent, I suppose, into this money. That was the cost of getting into the... Now there were no seats, there were just benches, of course. Everybody would sit down like this on the bench. You'd all sit together and watch the cinema. And but it was just 1 cent about how you got the money, how you got the 4D, which the 4 pence at the time was. A jam jar, if you got 2 jam jars, you know the big jam jars? A jar with jam in it? Yeah. So that, you got 2 of those, you could go down to the end of Barrack Street and you could sell it to the Jew man. And then it was a refundable money. It was either stout bottles or jam jars. You could sell your 2 jars to the Jew man for 4D, and that was the price of the cinema. So it was an amazing thing you could go to. And our favourite pictures anyway at the time were always cowboy pictures, closely followed by war pictures. Because I suppose boys had something about guns and stuff. So you'd come home and you'd be, I don't know if people like cowboy pictures anymore, but everyone would be, and there'd be cowboys shooting people on the way up with their little revolver or whatever they'd be at. And this Cowboys and Indians was a really, really, really big thing. If you were lucky, you might sell 3 jam jars and you might have a couple of pennies. And you could buy, for a penny, you could buy 2 halfpenny squares. These were little toffees and they were marked in little squares, you could break them. And if you went into the shop, the squares were on a big, huge sheet. And the person in the shop would actually have to break them off they were made by people in Limerick. And if you were lucky, they'd break unevenly, so you might get 2.5 for the price of a penny instead of having just 2 and you could eat it. And sometimes you might even get an apple, because down in the apple market, you know where Jeff's bar is down? Do you know where that side of over Jeff? Well, that's the apple market. It's so called because there used to be nothing, only barrows selling apples there, piles of apples, and people would come in and they'd sell their apples there. And of course, if you didn't have, the biggest thing when you went to the picture with your mate, if you had the money to buy an apple, you'd eat the apple, but then there'd be a row over who'd get to eat the crick. So you might eat the apple down to the very end, and then somebody would have to eat the remains of the apple. So you can imagine people with runny noses eating apples.